everyone. Today we have Dan. He's an amazing friend, and we reached out, we connected on Instagram, and it's been an amazing journey. While I would love to tell you more about who Dan is, I think it's best to hear it from him. So, hey Dan, welcome to the Soul's Conquest. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much. I'm doing really well. I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this since we booked it a few weeks ago.
Yay! Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I am a licensed clinical social worker.
Mhm.
So I do a private psychotherapy practice as well as being a life and executive coach. I do less executive coaching these days. And
Mhm.
so I work with people on things like getting forward momentum. So in psychotherapy, we look at the past, try to get that kind of all cleaned up so that we can move forward. And then with coaching, probably similar to what you do.
Yeah.
Um, we think about the now and then how can we really get, a nice forward momentum going and break down barriers to thriving. So there
Yay,
you
that's
go.
amazing. I have two questions from that. I know I'm going to jump into the questions right off the bat, but
Okay, cool.
yes, what is forward momentum according to you? Like, what's the meaning behind these two words, and why is it so close to your personal life?
Well, I think the concept of that came from my own personal experience. I had a lot of experience when I was younger, all the way up into my early 40s, of not having a failure to launch sequence, but kind of I would get launched and then not really gain the momentum career wise, personal wise. I hadn't done a lot of self study.
Mhm.
And so when I started coaching about 15 years ago, I was looking at that idea, but not in the way that I do now, because now, having been trained as a therapist, and getting the licensure and all that kind of thing, I started to look at it through frameworks. And then as the more I coached, and the more I observed myself, I thought, I'm beginning to notice what stops me from getting forward momentum.
Yeah.
So let's start playing with that with people
Mhm.
through study, self-study, I like to call it. And so forward momentum for me is like if there's a barrier, whether I've created it in my mind or there's an external barrier, how can I assess for that and then get moving again? So if it's a career choice, why am I not applying for jobs? People say to me, I get nervous and I don't apply for jobs, or I don't ask for promotions. What's holding me up? So I say, oh, there's a barrier to your forward momentum. Let's discover what that is. And when we unlock that, they get a promotion and they're like, my momentum's good.
Yeah.
So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's an amazing thing that you're doing, and from something that you said during your introduction, it kind of really vibed with me. The fact that you said that in psychotherapy you do a lot of working, clearing out the past so that you can kind of work towards the future, and that's something really amazing because today, like genuinely, just before our call, I launched this blog post that spoke about looking inward and moving forward, and it was regarding, like, I kind of don't like the fact, like, I've had a couple of people come up to me and they keep telling me that, hey, I'm tormented by my past, I'm tormented by what's happening in my life. And like, people come up to me and they tell me that, and I'm like, okay, so what are you doing to heal yourself, right? And
Hmm.
they say nothing. Like, I mean, are we supposed to be doing something? And I'm like, yes, obviously you're supposed to be doing something. And it's because, like, I feel like the notion of or the kind of phrase that time heals all wounds is kind of very, how do you say it, it's taken in a very wrong sense, in the sense that people expect to sit down and hope that everything works out for them. But
Hmm.
healing is a very on the hands kind of a thing. Like, you need to get your hands dirty and you need to work on your past. So that was kind of the inspiration behind the blog post as well, that people spend a lot of time caught up in their past. And a lot of time, I say this in the sweetest way possible, but a lot of times they create this concept of them being the ultimate victim. um
Yes.
yes, if that makes sense, right? Like, I know it sounds so bad, but it's so true. Like, they make this concept of them being the ultimate victim, that what they are going through no one has ever gone through, and no one will
Hmm.
probably ever go through. And you know the thing is, they're so caught up in that past that the present, the now, they are spending that being caught up in the past. And when the present becomes their past, like the recent past, if that kind of clears it out for the people who are listening in. Then they start to again go back to the, you know, first square and be like, oh my god, my recent past sucks. Like, again they go back to the concept of blaming others and becoming the victim themselves, as in they'll blame everyone out there, but they won't stop to think that what can we do to be better. And
Mm-hmm.
that was something that I was writing about. So when you said that in your introduction, I was like, okay, I think we're vibing good today. Yeah.
I totally love what you're saying there, especially about the passive part. Because
Yeah.
I think for a lot of my life, I was passively hoping that things would get better
Yeah.
or would change. And I never thought of what was the actionable thing that I could do to contribute to the change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice big life lesson on that one. So I get that totally what you're saying.
Yes. Amazing. So I want you to kind of do a deeper dive, if you could, as to what you do as a coach. So you have shared, you know, bits and pieces of this in your introduction, but could you do a deeper dive, as in share what you're doing, if that's comfortable with you?
Oh, yes, totally. Now, do you mean in the context of therapy and coaching?
Um, Coaching specifically, but if you would like to add on therapy as well, the more the merrier.
Very
Kind
good.
of thing. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because they look very similar, and I think I'll give you this explanation just so I can explain the differentiation. When people come to me for therapy,
Yeah.
as you probably can imagine, they're really looking at to excavate the past
Yeah.
because that's where a lot of the chains that are binding them are found.
Yeah.
And in coaching, we're looking at now and then the future, even though we have to observe the past often
Yeah.
in many ways, but we're not observing it in the way where we're hung up in it. And
Yeah.
so the deep dives that I do with people, I think similarly with coaching, take excavation of what you think about things, how
Mhm.
you feel about things, and then how do you behave in alignment with those things or incongruently with those things, depending on how you're seeing it.
Yeah.
So I bring mindfulness to my coaching practice, just like I do in the therapy practice. And in mindfulness, we look at the present, like you were saying earlier. And if we can track what's happening for us in the present, I do this body of work called Hakomi. And so
Mhm.
we look at our body and how it's resonating with our experience, our internal one and our external one, and we can kind of track where we are in any given moment. And so the deep dive for me begins there. Like right now in this moment, what are your deepest concerns, right? And often the question will leave an answer that's about past. And we'll say, well, that's interesting because you're talking about how I've never been able to fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And so if we can get underneath that, then we can get into this present moment because we can say, oh, that's impacting me in this way now. And so it's a very mindful way of looking at our current experience. So does that answer your question,
Yes,
about
it does.
deep diving? It's not as deep as maybe you wanted to go. I don't know.
No, 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 it's perfect. It's perfect. I love it. And I kind of resonated with this one thing that you were saying, right? Like a lot of times it's happened with me as well, that while I'm coaching, we are talking about something that's acting as an obstacle right now in their lives. But when I kind of ask the hard hitting questions, basically the questions
Mm.
that might make my clients cry, I wear that as a badge of honor, to be honest. Uh, but yeah, when you look at stuff like that, they often find that the chains, as you said, originate from the past. It's something that's binding them, right? Like, I haven't had love in this particular form, which is why I have issues in the matters of love, in the matters of trust. And it's so amazing that, a lot of times I think we're going to talk about past a lot during this call, because for me, I think that a lot of times people want to kind of completely obliterate the past, as in they kind of want to completely forget that the past existed. And
Mm.
in wanting to do that, they're constantly ignoring the source of their problems. And so as much as they ignore it, that much the problem kind of screams louder. And I say this a lot of times, right? Yes, like it.
Totally.
Yeah, because I've seen this a lot of times. I keep telling all the people I work with that if your emotions are talking to you, listen to them, because if you don't, it's going to act like an angry little child and it's going to
Mm.
scream at the top of its lungs. and it might not affect you directly, but it will have indirect consequences throughout your day, throughout your present and future. So
Mm.
kind of take in what has happened. So when you look at past, you have to acknowledge that something has happened in your life, whether good or bad, and you have to acknowledge it. Sorry, acknowledge it and accept it. So kind of like,
Mm.
okay, this has
Yeah.
happened, and they're two very different things as much as they sound similar. But yeah, you have to accept what has happened to you so that you can move forward from it, because the more you ignore, the more it kind of goes like, why ignoring me?
Yeah, I totally get that. It brings me back to what you were asking me before. The deep dive happens, which happened for me, which was very difficult.
Mhm.
In this Hakomi work that I'm talking about, we have to develop the skill set where we learn to be with
Mhm.
whatever that thing is, the difficult emotional content that's associated with something that was hard, or the current recognition that a barrier is in our way to getting forward momentum. And so what we do is we practice being with that without doing anything,
Yeah.
without trying to fix it, or even trying to figure it out. And that
Ooh.
is hard work. I
Yeah.
think it was hard work for me. It still continues to be. And I think it's hard work for people when I pose it to them, because often they're like, why are you asking me to do that? It sounds horrible.
Yeah, I know. So I want to ask you more about this process. Can you tell me a bit more about it? It sounds extremely interesting, because for me, my kind of process is to ask the questions and get the answers, and then ask some more questions to get the answers. But
Mm.
your way of treatment, or to kind of deal with stuff, is to kind of be in that spot, be in that situation a bit more. So I want to know your perspective on like coaching via this way. And did you say Sakomi? Is Am I saying that right?
Yes, Hakomi.
Hakomi.
Yes. And now it is a mindfulness centered somatic psychotherapy,
Mm-hmm.
but the modality itself isn't really restricted to therapy,
Right.
because the thing that we want to do, and I've been speaking about this recently on my TikTok videos and Instagram, when it comes to pain or things that are painful, or the suffering that we feel, I think our first response, I was socialized this way. I don't know about you. I'd be curious to hear about your experience. In my family system, we did not feel things. We needed to get a stiff upper lip, bite the bullet, and kind of move through whatever painful experience we were having without talking about it and without acknowledging it. We're going to grin and bear it.
Yeah.
And so this idea of leaning into something that's hard, difficult, uncomfortable, um, we develop a practice around that. So in the beginning, it's not easy. And we use language like this painful thing that I'm looking at. Even in coaching, it's like this thing still looms. And I think that I beat it, but I don't need therapy about it, but it still looms. And it's hard for me to acknowledge it. And so the practice is to be with it without figuring anything out about it, not doing anything to it. And that's difficult for people. I think that's where we're going with this.
Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot, to be honest. It's an amazing concept. Wow, I would genuinely want is this something that you developed, or is this something that's already existing?
Oh no, already existing for quite a long time. You can actually get a practitioner's book on Hakomi, and preferably you train with people to do it. But you can read the practitioner's book and get a huge amount of insight from it. It's just beautiful the way you observe your emotions and your thoughts and what happens in your body, and how you can transform that into something actionable. Like, if I can be with this thing that is either a mental block or um, anything that's holding me up without judgment, that's a very
Yeah,
mindfulness
yeah,
centered principle. Like, let's don't judge it. Let's just call it what it is and then be with it.
yeah.
Well, things happen for people, things shift. We feel a transformation. I mean, that's been my experience with
Wow.
clients and myself.
Wow, that's amazing. I'll definitely check that out because it sounds amazing. Woo. I want to ask you, why do you work towards this particular craft? Like, why is it important for you to help kind of people, help people have that forward momentum in their life? If that kind of makes sense, why is it important to you?
Again, personal disclosure, I had the experience of that quite a bit. And as a human, I can still have moments of that. Um, I see it a lot in the people who come to me. They have language around their experience that's that looks like I just can't seem to, and then fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Or here I am, like when I've worked with executives, CEOs of companies, and they're like, I don't even know how I got here.
Yeah.
How did I become CEO in this company? And
Yeah.
I still have these constructs in my mind that are like blocks.
Yeah.
And so, I think it was from personal experience and then seeing it. And then my language, I think the forward momentum language, it's not new to me, but it resonates with me because I know when I feel stuck, even though in physical reality, I may not actually be stuck. That's another
Yeah.
mental construct around my experience.
Mhm.
But when I feel like I'm in forward momentum, there's flow there. It's almost, like alignment with something, your purpose, your contribution. And when there's flow, it's like, ooh, forward momentum. And those words just stuck with me years ago.
Yeah, that sounds an amazing thing. How did you start out with this? Like, can you share your journey with us? How did you start? Or where did that first thought come in that you wanted to be a coach who does this and helps people with this particular thing?
Okay, very good. I again, personal disclosure. I experienced, like I said, I was coaching before, but in a more of a corporate context
Yes.
about helping people get forward momentum. But I wasn't using that language before. And then about 10 years ago, I had what I'll call a dark night of the soul. It was a transformative experience, spiritual experience that completely shifted my whole perception of my being in the world.
Yeah.
So the contribution came out of me having an understanding of what that feels like.
Yeah.
And after I went and got some help with a therapist and then later on a coach and started to understand myself more, even though I often joke that I have a limited understanding of the self, but I
Yeah.
have an experience of it that I can track.
Yeah.
I just had this moment where I was called. I said, if I can have this experience as wonky as I am
Yeah.
and actually stand in myself like more fully,
Yeah.
I want to be able to help people do the same thing. Um, and as time's gone by, I'm just doing it more and more. And I don't know, it's the most joyous thing I've ever done in my life. And I've had a lot of incarnations in this life, figuratively, where I've done
Yeah.
lots of different things, from,
Yeah.
I think I've shared with you before, music and then theater. And then now, the therapy and coaching thing. And this is where I feel most placed, most in alignment with myself. And the gift of being of service to people in that way is, well, you can't put a price on it.
Most definitely. I love that, the things that you said. It kind of resonated with me a lot because before this, right, like I have done hotel management. I was into marketing. I was working as a social media manager, as a content writer, as a content marketer. Um, I have done it in different fields as well. Like, so it's been in advertising. I've done in solar energy. I've worked like with solar energy and stuff like that. I've worked with hotels, and then
Hmm.
it's been a crazy journey, to be completely honest. But what you said kind of resonated because eventually when I did start coaching, and I have to thank COVID for that because it gave me the time, because I had to lose my job and I was like, okay, so I have all the time in the world. Why not do this one thing that I've been wanting to do for a long time? And yeah, it kind of just like perfectly aligned. Like, you were kind of moving around and then things kind of aligned and then everything started to flow in a way that I had always wished for it to flow, but I never thought it was imaginable or like, it was possible for me to do something like this. So what you
Hmm.
said kind of like resonated like crazy. Yeah.
Oh, it's so cool to hear that. I love to hear it. When you talk about it, there's such an energy behind it. I
Yeah.
can I can feel the alignment because you're just like in it completely,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Ooh, love the flow. Um, yeah. So I want to ask you. My next question for you is, when you are doing this coaching program or when you're working with a new client. Let's say you're working with a new client in your coaching program. What is it that you hope to achieve before starting, the program with this particular client?
For me,
Yes, for
the
you.
the most important thing for me, and because I can become nervous if I don't feel that I have a sort of empathic understanding of where they are.
Yeah.
I don't know a better way to put that.
Yeah.
When I am assessing, when they come to visit and they're talking to me about why they want to work with me and then what the areas that they want to work on, the richness of their story has to fully resonate with me so that I can understand my own version of that, even though I could, you know how we put ourselves into someone else's shoes for a moment in our imagination. Well, when I have that experience of like, oh, I have my own version of this. And so now I have a frame of reference or a point of reference. That's hugely important to me. And for me, that's what I need first. And I have sat with people before in the past, done the assessment, looked at the notion of what they're looking at, and have made the decision that I'm not the coach for them.
Yeah.
Even if they're like, no, but you were recommended to me, and I've read your website, and I think it's perfect. And it's often because, and this has only happened a couple of times, but I thought, I don't know where to begin. I don't know what the questions I would ask you are, because what you're bringing to me, I think, is maybe out of my expertise, and I would be doing you a disservice to take all your dollar bills
Yeah.
and just sit with you. And so I've done that a couple of times and been able to refer them to coaches that they have later said, thank you so much, because fill in the blank name is the perfect match for me and I'm thriving. And I'm like, yes. And you wouldn't have done that with me because I would have been
Yeah.
completely confused.
Yeah, dude. Oh my God. So that is so important. Because as coaches, you're when you're beginning out, at least you're in that zone of accepting whoever comes to you. But as you grow as a coach, you start to kind of filter out the submissions or the applications, and then you're like, okay, so this is going to be a perfect match for me. This is not going to be a perfect match for me. So, what is your process when you are sifting through the applications, as like that sounds cooler, so yeah, sifting through the applications to kind of choose if someone is the right fit for you, and if that person is or you are a right fit for that particular person?
I think the thing where I discover that is in a call, and I always insist on a video call.
Yeah.
I'm highly trained in looking at people's nonverbals. And so I need to see their face. I need to see the way they use their hands. I make them sit in a very specific way in front of the camera so I can see, a good bit of them. And that gives me the impetus as to whether or not we're going to work together. I hate being on the phone where I can't see someone's face. And so, if somebody shows up on when they send me an email through my website or what have you, and I read it and I think, I don't even know where I would begin here, I still have the call and then discover it. Like I said, it's only happened a couple of times over the years where I've just had to say, I just can't be your coach because I don't know what I would do to help you. So yeah, it happens in the interview. I mean, do you have a different experience of that?
No, I have a pretty similar experience, but I would have to say I'm like a really beginner in the coaching practice. Like I just started this a couple of months ago, so I don't have like a huge influx of clients for me to like all the clients I've had so far have been pretty much in tune with what I can help them achieve and what they need from me as a coach. And so it's like it's been a smooth process, but I would love to know what do you say, when you do say no to a particular client, what do you feel at that time? Because a lot of times I feel coaches also have this kind of internal struggle going on, because I would like to say this, like when we are being a coach, a lot of us, we have that tiny bit of ego kind of jump up and be like, I am the coach kind of a thing, right? Like, I know it sounds so bad and it puts
No.
in a bad light, but you have that moment of I am the coach. So when you do say no, a lot of people have this guilt kind of that's stabbing them in the gut that, oh my God, how can I say no to this person? This person needs help. And maybe I can help them, maybe I can't, but I'll work with them. Maybe I can help them kind of a thing. So how do you work through those emotions,
Okay, that's such a great question. I had a lot of that when I was younger. And wanting to be a people pleaser and even sometimes probably an approval seeking schema in my mind, which, basically I've taken dynamite to because it doesn't serve me. I rest really well in being clear about who I am. And being able to do that means that I can say with confidence when I feel that I'm not the person for you. But I'm a clinical social worker, so I'm always framing things to the best of my ability with a strengths-focused perspective. And so without saying, I'm just not the guy for you, right? I just wouldn't
Yeah.
put it that way. I would say, I'm looking at this and all of the powerful things that you're bringing here. And here are my concerns. The things that you are a rock star at, I'm not.
Yeah.
And so I feel that your spark of divinity deserves someone who can be in alignment this way with it. If I
Yeah.
come and work with you, we're going to be like this and it's
Yeah.
going to be wonky.
Yeah.
And maybe we will discover something together and benefit each other in being of service to one another. Because my feeling is when people come to me for coaching, they are serving me as much as I'm serving them. And some
Exactly.
people don't believe that, but I can see that you think that, because I learn as much from them, where sometimes I joke, I should give you half your money back, but we're not going to do that. But,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, because they've made my life richer by bringing the things that we've deconstructed with our
Yeah.
critical thinking skills and our hearts and our minds in balance.
Yeah.
So yeah, does that answer?
Yeah, it does, because I kind of get the vibe that as coach, as a coach, you are kind of working for them, right? Like, so your focus is on them and not on yourself. But
Mm-hmm.
there's like a very it's like walking the kind of blade of a knee of a knife, if that makes any sense, right? Like, you
Good
can go
one.
this way or you can go that way, but it's like the constant tug of war between you as a coach versus them as a client. So you don't want to go too much over their sides, but you also don't want to go too much internally, because then it just messes up the entire process.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yeah.
it always has to be about elevating them, and
Yeah.
we're there to be of service. And yes, it's flattering when somebody says, I want a little taste of your wisdom. And
Yeah.
then I remind them that all the wisdom that I have comes from minds greater than mine. Then I'm just redisseminating
Yeah.
that information through my own lens and through my own special, wacky way of being in the world. Yeah. But to serve them is the goal and the privilege and really the only thing. And that keeps me out of my monkey mind. That keeps
Yeah.
me out of my ego, and it even helps me to shift my biases to the
Yeah.
side, because I think if I'm going to be of service to this person, they have to be held in a way that's not about me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I
Yeah.
have to not be afraid to say sometimes, I don't know what to do here with this.
Yeah. That makes
There's
a
a
lot of
moment, that you and I both are finding this to be a conundrum, and I don't know, but I guarantee you by the next time we meet, I'm going to have a solution for you. And then I will consult other coaches, and I will consult the database and the evidence base and see if I can't come up with something. Fortunately, that doesn't happen often, but I feel I'm in integrity if I say, oh gosh, I don't know what to do right
yeah.
now with what you just presented. And people appreciate that, because remember, we're human beings. We're not demigods.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah, that's an amazing thing. I also wanted to add on to this beautiful thing that you kind of spoke about earlier. And you were telling that you learn as much from them as much as they learn from you. And that's so
Mm.
beautiful, because some of the most beautiful insights in life I have received while I was on a coaching call. Because you so, like, throughout life, or throughout, I would say, throughout my journey, it's always been my perspective about how the world is moving around me, and that's what I would love to share. But sometimes when I'm working with my clients and I get to see their perspective, this has happened very randomly, but there have been moments where you know if you were to randomly ask me a particular question, I wouldn't have the answer. But while I'm talking with them and while I'm in the flow with them, um, from somewhere that answer comes, right? And it's the perfect answer that they need. And after we're done with the call, I'm just sitting there like, where did that come from? Like, what? Where was my mind even to have come up with that? And it's so beautiful that I have to use that example as many times as I can, because um, it's kind of like the shiny piece of gem you weren't looking for but you found, so now you have to share it with the world, kind of
Mm.
a thing. So
Mhm.
yeah, I loved that particular part of your process. It made a lot of sense.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you hope the people you are working with will feel post the completion of your program?
Ah, satisfaction.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I think when we set goals, and I imagine you work similarly, we set goals just like we do in therapy. We have treatment goals, but in coaching, we have goals. And then when we can say that we've got most of that bullet point list completed, and someone is using language like, I'm feeling a sense of mastery in this area.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not ready to let you go, but something's happening to me that is so beautiful, and I'm feeling like I haven't felt before. Um, it's the language around that experience. If we're ticking boxes, I find that mundane and kind of boring. That's for research papers, for like, psychological journals.
Mhm.
But when we're having language around, I came here to do fill in the blank thing. And what's happened is with fill in the blank thing, I've gotten all these other skill sets. The fill in the blank thing is not yet to my liking, but I've gained so much more around that thing that I feel like now I've got forward momentum with regard to making that thing happen. And so language around that is what I want to hear from people. With the richer the language about the experience, for me, is the juice of the fruit. It's like when someone's using language like that and they're filled with some kind of thrill or luminous quality of how happy they are about what they've discovered about themselves. Well, that's what I want from them in the end. And we have to tick the boxes, of course. We
Yeah.
have to do that. But it doesn't have to be a rigid thing. We don't set the 5 goals, and if 4 of them are met, we're not done.
Yeah.
We might finish 3 goals, and then the other 2 goals, the person decides, I can do that on my own.
Yeah.
I can go and work that and come back in 3 months and check in with you and say, this is what's happened to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I've got a couple of questions from that. And the biggest question that's kind of like blinking in front of my mind is basically that I get the vibe that you coach not for performance but more for development. So
Mm,
because you said this one thing, right? Like they might not have like they don't want to leave you, but they have this thing that they want to work on right now by themselves. So that's a beautiful emotion, and that's a thing that I hope all coaches kind of work towards, because the concept of now as you are a therapist as well as a coach, you will understand that uh, and you might kind of take offense also, I'm sorry, but therapists are kind of someone who are constantly with them. So they are like working each tiny step towards a particular goal. But coaches are someone who kind of kickstart the process and then let the person work through whatever emotions they have, right? So
mm.
what do you have to say about that?
Ooh, that's juicy. I love that. And I love what you're seeing there. I love that you use the language performance and development.
Yeah.
There's an element of development in the therapy and the coaching, and when we look at it through a coaching lens, you know development for me, and you've given me new language, because I used to, when I work with corporate systems, which I do less and less of.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't have any corporate people right now. I have people who work in corporate, but they're there for more of a life coaching purpose.
Yeah.
um, Performance has a rigidity to it that I think doesn't resonate with me always.
Mhm.
And so the development, even though, we say sometimes in corporate arenas, like soft skills lead to hard results, like
Yeah.
good hard end results, whatever. There's language like that around that. And I'm kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Mhm.
Coaching with a development mindset means that people are developing skill sets, and they will take those skill sets and then further develop themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas in a therapeutic arena, someone might say, my anxiety needs to come down or I'm going to fall apart, right? So we work on anxiety coming down. And when the anxiety has a baseline that looks more acceptable to them, well, we've met our goal. They have a medication management through a psychiatrist, and then maybe our goals are met and then therapy's done. Boom, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas and it's great because there's been some development goals in that as well. But
Yeah.
coaching, like you and I said before, we start kind of where we are here. If we have to do a ton of excavating in the past, well, we probably need to go to a therapist first. Then
Yeah.
when we get here, we think about the idea of, well, what am I developing? And then if I'm going to pay this guy or this gal, can I take those tools and then further develop? And maybe even, which is so cool, I have had one person call me a year later and say, I've developed a whole new way of working with my teams out of what you and I discovered. And I've patented it. And it's now a training manual that's for sale, right? And that came of her own development. And she told me about it. And she was like, you can see where the roots are. It's in what we did, but I've named it something completely different. And it has elements that you never told me about. And
Yeah.
I'm like, you rock star.
Yeah, that's amazing. Oh my God, I can feel the energy, and wow, that's amazing. So I wanted to say the words that I was using, right? Like coaching for performance and coaching for development. That comes from a book called The Coaching Habit. Now, I
Hmm.
don't know if you've read it or not, but it's an amazing book, especially for coaches who are just starting out, because I've read it. I'm still reading it, to be
Hmm.
completely honest, because it's like so much of information, and I'm constantly kind of working with whatever insight I'm getting. So I'm not
Hmm.
just like rushing through the book, but it's an amazing book. And I definitely think that new coaches and you as well, Dan, like, you got to read it, because there's so many amazing insights and tips as to how you can coach better. So just wanted to add that, because I like to give credit, because I didn't feel like it was language that I kind of created on my own self. It was something
Hmm.
that I took from a place. So I wanted to share that.
Beautiful. I'll have to check that book out.
Yes, I'll send you a link afterwards to
Very
that.
good.
Yes.
Mm.
The second thing that I wanted to say, is what you said, right? Like if you have 5 goals, you have completed 3, and you're working on 2, but you are doing that journey on yourself. That's beautiful, because, we kind of covered this in the previous question and answer, but basically it was the fact that you start something and then you let them be, kind of like, you tell a little kid that this is this is a ball of clay. You can do crazy things with this. You teach them what you can do, and or
Mm.
what they can do, and then you just let them be, and then they'll come up to you with their own creative concepts and thoughts and stuff like that, like, hey, here you go. See what I created. And it's such an amazing thing. How do you feel when something like that happens?
Oh gosh, how do I feel?
Mhm.
It's a it's a privilege. It's a when that happens, or my own version of when I've had that experience, it's almost like a giddiness, because it comes from an expected place, because we're working on ourselves, and as a coach, we're working on ourselves while we're working with somebody. I mean, we're developing things where we get these downloads, I jokingly say, from the universe, where we have
Yeah.
this moment of inspiration, and then the client goes, oh my gosh, that's amazing, and we're going, I know, and I don't even know where that came
Yeah,
from. And
exactly.
then right, and then later we're working on it on ourselves, because we're like so amazed that there's this new wisdom that's come. Maybe it's come from something we've read and we had not integrated fully, like whatever that is. But when we have that experience that you're talking about, I think that's the best,
Yeah,
because it's a contribution to us as well in
right.
that moment.
That
Yeah.
that's kind of what I was talking about with the gem example, that like you're talking with a client, and then suddenly you go like, boom, I have this thing that I don't know where it came from, but it's here, so I'm sharing it with the world. Yeah, I think the word download fits it perfectly, because you're downloading something from the universe, and then you're uploading it around to share it with
Mm.
people. Ooh, I'm getting goosebumps.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. I had a coach that I worked with for a while, not as a client, but worked with in some workshops to kind of learn about some things she was talking about. And I remember her using this word, and I'd used this word in a different way in my therapy, but she said, the more of a conduit we can be.
Mhm.
And she's like, I know that's kind of wooey sounding and a little bit new agey,
Yeah.
but it's a thing. The more of a conduit we can be, a conduit for the transference of energy between you and the client, and a conduit for all of the energy and information that you've put into learning about your craft, things that you didn't fully integrate that suddenly pop up and remind you, like, this is a moment to use that thing that I learned 5 years ago that I've never had the experience of doing. The
Yeah.
more we can be a conduit, the more in flow we will be with our people and in flow with ourselves. When we are more of a vessel, we can hold a lot, but vessels get full.
Ooh,
And
yeah.
then vessels don't generally kind of get new information. Like when you fill up a glass with water, and you put more water in it, it's just spilling over the edge. Whereas a conduit is like a pipe. And so you're just channeling information and delivering information and receiving information. And I never forgot that because I thought, wow, I want to be a conduit.
Oh yeah, I get the same vibes. It's so amazing when you explained it like that. That made a lot of sense, like we are sort of a medium,
Mm-hmm.
whatever's happening around us, and that's a beautiful way to explain that.
Mm.
My next question for you would be, why is it important that for you that the clients use the language, as you said, right? Like you said that they start to use this language after they're done post completion of the program. So
Mm.
why is it important for the clients to use that language?
I think for two reasons. One, the smallest reason is that because I've used maybe similar language,
Mm-hmm.
that when I'm hearing language, and not that they have to parrot what I'm saying, but when I hear them using their own language around their own development, it's a signpost for me that there has been progress made. And now, being a clinician, as a therapist, we're always looking for progress, right? And we're notating very specific things about progress, right? Client is smoking now half a pack of cigarettes a day rather than 2 packs of cigarettes, and we're notating that to track progress. So one, it's for me to understand that there's progress made, and but two, I think when people use language and in their own language around an experience that's novel for them, and we know that the brain loves novelty, right?
Yeah.
Anything new, and then so they're integrating all these principles, and then they're using them in their own way that looks nothing like the way we would use them. When they're using language like that, that means their experience in the fullness of their being, the information that they've taken in has been integrated,
Mm-hmm.
and it's part of them now.
Yeah.
And that's, like I said, also for me, but for them, I've even had people say, I even speak in a new way, and my family are like, you're a weirdo, but you're cooler than you used to be. Yeah.
that's definitely progress. Oh, I would love to have that kind of progress. My next question for you is, what were some of the obstacles that you faced during your journey as a coach? So from the moment that you wanted to become a coach to the moment that you are here right now recording this podcast with me, what were some of the major obstacles that you faced?
Okay, that's a good one. One was when I started, and I'll just talk about life coaching and not the executive coaching I was doing before. When I was integrating my clinician brain
Mm-hmm.
in and trying to find the intersection of that with coaching, which is very different. I'm not a psychological coach. Of course, I bring psychology to coaching practices, but I'm more of an ontological coach, and looking at the quality of somebody's being in the world. And so in the beginning, when I said, "Oh, I'm going to go and do some, work as a coach, I'm going to get some training as a coach, I'm going to start integrating things differently," I had a little bit of trouble staying out of the hyper analytical brain that a therapist can have.
Yeah.
And so we're trained, and this is not a knock on clinical social workers or therapists or psychologists. We're trained to assess for a problem and then look for solutions to a problem. So my brain was having the experience of, am I looking for what's wrong over there? And I don't want to be doing that. I want to be looking at the person from a completely strengths focused way. And so when they're saying I have a problem with whatever, my brain would dive into like, oh, now we have to like figure out the 5 bullet points for them to do to fix this problem. And that was a barrier to me being a good coach in the beginning. That was because I think I was bringing too much of a hyper analysis to coaching. I'm much more spacious now. The back of my brain is going, don't forget you're a therapist, right? And it won't ever, because I still work as a therapist, but I'm more open to experience and allowing it just to be what it is. And yes, I see if there what problems are, but I'm more apt to ask an open-ended question about that problem rather than try to deconstruct it with somebody, because that's a very therapeutic way of looking. Let's
Yeah.
deconstruct a problem and get underneath it and then find all the things we need to do. Whereas coaching, because someone's not hung up by the past, they're looking at forward momentum. they are having the experience of, okay, so can I take a wide angle view of this? And now I bring more of a wide angle view as a coach, and then let the therapist brain take a nap.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. So, what I'm getting from this is that for you, specifically for you, the therapist is kind of, if we split yourself into two different personas, that of a therapist and that of a coach, for you, being a therapist is something that's super analytical, and for you, for your persona of a coach, you kind of want to bring in more emotional reasoning, and you want to look at it from a human kind of point of view, if that makes any sense. Is that right for me to kind of deduct it that way, or would you like
I,
to
I think I think you're onto something there. The therapist, even though there's more analysis, maybe, I think that the presence, the loving presence of a human being working with a human being who's suffering is equal to that of coaching. But what you're right about, though, which I love how you're looking at it, and tell me if I'm hitting on what you mean.
Yeah.
Like I was saying before, there's something a little more spacious about the coaching. And rather than looking at what's wrong over there, like if someone's hallucinating because they have psychosis, it's very easy for us to say, that's a problem, of course, and there's something wrong there.
Yeah.
It's easy for us as humans to do that. I try to have more of an open mind and say, okay, well, let's not frame it that way. Let's frame it a different way. With coaching, someone brings us a problem, and from again, a very human perspective, a gentle quality of like, okay, well, let's not look for what's wrong here.
Yeah.
Let's see what is the barrier, and use
Right.
different language around that, rather than psychosis and keeps wanting to jump out of a window every night because of whatever,
Yeah.
hallucinations are happening. Well, that's a problem, and something's wrong is there. In coaching, it's, here's my problem. Okay, good. What if it weren't a problem?
Yeah.
Like, what if we didn't say that this was a problem? I'll ask that question, like, this thing you're telling me is a barrier. What if that weren't actually a problem? And at the root of that thing that is the barrier are actually lying all of your strengths, or
Yeah.
your best strengths, because that's what a thing I've discovered as well. Our weaknesses or our failings are often rooted in our strongest elements,
Yeah.
directly related. It's like they're wired together.
I love that. I love the way you kind of spoke about that, because for me also, I'll give you a little bit of a personal story. So, we used to have the slam books. I don't know if you remember. So, um I don't know, maybe it's a pretty Indian thing, but it's the like friends used to kind of write the name. So we used to have this thing called slam books. So we used to write down like towards the end, it's kind of like a very yearbooky kind of a thing, where
Yeah.
people can write down messages and stuff. But we had like an entire book about that. So, like, you could write names, pet names, numbers, and crushes and things like that. And wait, I kind of forgot what we were speaking about. I got so involved in that nostalgia. Oh yeah, okay, now I remember.
Okay.
So there used to be this section of strengths, like what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. And like whenever I used to give it to my dad, or whenever I used to give it to an adult, because I wanted to be like, oh yeah, like, I don't only have kids my age, but I also have adults writing down things in my slam book, and it was like pretty cool. So my dad always used to write this, right? Like, my strength is my family, but my weakness is also my family. And
Mm-hmm.
I used to be like, why is he writing that, right? Like, I used to always be like, why is he writing that? Why is he writing that? And then now that I've grown up, I kind of understand why he wrote that, because for me, it's the same exact thing. Like, the amount of strength that I draw from my family, they're also my weakness. So, like, if something happens to them, I would basically be like, like, what am I supposed to do with life? Um, yeah, it's a pretty grim thing, but yeah, I kind of, when you were talking about strengths and weaknesses and them being completely interlinked, I think that was the first thing that popped up in my mind, that, I used to view this as something that was pretty alien to me, that how can strengths and weaknesses be so interlinked? But then now that I've
Yeah.
grown up, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, what the hell is this? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh. Wow, we spoke about a lot of things.
Good stuff.
Yeah. So you said that some of the obstacles that you faced in your journey as a coach was to kind of work around the blocks that you had.
Say that again.
Yes. So you said as a coach in your journey, the obstacles that you had were mostly the blocks that you kind of put up in life, especially regarding the therapist and the coach kind of
Mm-hmm.
vying
Mm-hmm.
for your attention, basically, if that makes any sense. So,
Yeah.
what were the solutions that you came up with to deal with these obstacles, to deal with this constant tug of war, basically?
That's a good one. I had someone coach me
Ooh.
because I said, I'm having trouble with this and I love to coach because it's a different part of what I feel like I'm called to do.
Mhm.
And then I talked about, and that was just one obstacle I had with the whole therapy coaching thing. But I had someone coach me,
Mhm.
help me sort of get underneath what do you think? Why was I being rigid?
Yeah,
Something in my brain was being rigid. And what I discovered was I was trying to hold on to what I knew. I'd
yeah,
worked really hard on that master's degree. I'd worked really hard at passing those terribly difficult board licensing exams that took four
yeah,
and a half hours to take, right?
yeah,
And getting supervised. And so my brain was saying, don't let go of what you know because you don't know what you're doing over here in the coaching arena
yeah,
as much as you do as a therapist. And so it was trying to hold on for dear life to
yeah,
what I thought I knew, whereas allowing myself to just be with, here we are again, back with just being with,
yeah.
without trying to figure out or fix anything in a
Mhm.
new and novel way. And my brain, as it does, says,
Yeah,
no, this is scary territory. And so, really, how I broke through that was to get support and say, I'm having trouble with this and I don't know how to do it. And here I am saying, I'm a coach and therapist, and I'm in the middle of this thing, not knowing how to be a better coach. So, someone wiser and someone with a skill set to help me break that down was able to help me with that. And I would recommend that for anybody.
oh, yeah, most definitely. I would love to know more about this journey if you're comfortable sharing it. Like, how did you, like, what was the biggest insight that kind of pushed you to kind of, have the therapist mind, but also coach? So, kind of like
Mhm.
enter the scary territory while holding hands with things that you were already aware of. So, what was the biggest insight that kind of pushed you to be in the middle of these two personas?
Hmm. Yeah, there's a polarity and a duality for me and my experience as a therapist on one side and as a coach on the other. And although I adore both, something about the from this moment and how we look at the future seemed very interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a lot of therapy is, what do you want in the future? What do you want to create? But it's a lot of looking at the past, a lot of looking backwards, and a lot of saying, I see in my early development, my family system looked like this. And then I showed up like this later on in life because of that. And then, or this really bothers me still, or I have trauma from my childhood,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. And then, and that's great. And I love that work. And people get forward momentum out of doing therapy. But there was something about meeting somebody in this sort of central place where they're like, I've done therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and there are still things that I have issues with, but they don't hold me back in the same way. And I'm looking to do these things in my life. That was like another half of my favorite cake, right?
Yeah.
This is half of the cake that I love, and then this is the other half that I love. And it was like, wow, we're going to start here and not mess around too much over there in order to look towards the future. And that sort of was exciting to me, and it was novel in the beginning, so it was juicy and like, wow, another. So now I have both of these arenas, and they're very fulfilling. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does perfectly. I love the way you said that. Wow, it was amazing. My next question to you is, as this is a spiritual podcast, I think it would be awesome to know if you have any spiritual or self-care routines in your work life, as well as when you're working with a particular client.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. And we'll keep it coaching minded, but in general, I have a meditation practice.
Mhm.
And I in my meditation practice has evolved over the years. And my current meditation practice is what I like to call, and a friend of mine who's a transcendental meditation teacher absolutely hates it when I say this because she thinks it sounds like drug use, but it's not drug use. I say I do hits of meditation during the day. So I have
Yeah.
these multiple times, sometimes a dozen times of 4 to 5 minute step into the bathroom, shut the door, and be completely still and do a mindfulness check-in and a somatic check-in. And I'll do that multiple times during the day. Sometimes it's 3 times a day and sometimes it's a dozen times. Recently, because my life has been very complex with all the things that I'm doing, I've inserted more meditation so that I don't go completely crazy. It helps me completely align with my best self each time I take 2, 3, 5 minutes to do that. So self-care is very important for me being a therapist and being a coach as well, because I preach self-care to people. I say, you know, what are your self-care routines? And if they don't have any, we develop them. And then when they do have them and then they don't do them, I say, why are you not doing them? So if I'm not doing them, who am I to be saying,
Oh yeah, most
do your
definitely. Yeah,
self-care,
yeah,
right? So I
yeah.
have meditation practice. You know, I do yoga,
Mhm.
and yoga for me is a spiritual practice, even though it feels great physically because it keeps my 53-year-old creaky body from being creaky.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's something. And I think those are the two most important things, apart from connection and connection with my partner, connection with people like you. I have to keep that in my life. And that keeps me on a, I know I can't think of a better way to describe it, but then a plane of existence that just feels good. So if I stay connected and I do my self-care and do my yoga and eat well and all of that, I feel like that I can function highly
That's
for the most part.
That's perfect. I love that. I love that a lot because meditation is definitely one of the things that, like it's a part of my coaching program, if that makes sense. So we work 2 weeks
Oh,
on
you
meditation.
incorporate that?
Yeah, I do because I'm like,
That's cool.
yeah, because for me in my coaching practice, it's a lot about talking to yourself. So I give them these two techniques and we work through distractions and stuff like that. But I give them two techniques that they can do, one in the early morning and the other is basically when they will actually reach in and connect with themselves and have these long conversations without having to worry about someone looking at them being like, oh my god, why is it being so crazy. Like you are within yourself, um, and you're true to yourself, because there is this one thing that I like to say a lot is that you can lie to the entire world, you can lie to your god, you can lie to your friends, your family members, whosoever, but you can't lie to yourself, because when you do that, like, even if you make it sound like a very convincing lie, somewhere deep down there is this one kind of tickle, like, I don't think
Oh,
that's right.
that's
Correct.
good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I always tell people that you need to communicate with yourself, and that's a really huge part of the program, that it's all about communicating with yourself. So
Uh-huh.
meditation is an extremely important thing that even I do every single day. Like, I need to meditate in the morning to kind of because that's the place where I give gratitude to the world, to the universe, to
Mm-hmm.
myself, to my mind,
Mm-hmm.
body, and soul. And that's how I kind of fit in my gratitude journey as well. And then I do
Mm-hmm.
meditations every basically, especially when there is like this huge thing that's really troubling me and I don't know what to do about it. I'm like, it's time to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's the perfect place where I can find the answers that I'm looking for. So yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh. um so because this podcast is called the Soul's Conquest, what was one of your biggest soul's conquest, and what is shaping up to be your soul's conquest right now?
Mm. Okay. This is really good. I when I because I knew that you had this podcast and you and I did a live on Instagram and
Yeah,
we hint at things like this. And when I think about conquest in the beginning, I'll bust myself here.
go for it.
I had monkey mind around the idea of conquest in the soul.
Yeah.
um, I had this moment of like, ooh, does that mean that my soul needs to get over some kind of hump in order to like have this like
Yeah.
moment? And then when I sat with that, I discovered that that was not the truth for that for me. It was like an immediate response in my brain, and it's actually not the truth. The soul's conquest for me was and is currently still a discovery of finding alignment with what I identify, even with my limited understanding, is my true self,
Ooh.
higher self, whatever
Mhm.
people want to call it. And I'm going to use language here, and I hope it resonates, and I think it will resonate with you. And people say this all the time, but it's really truthful for me. When I had the experience of realizing that I am a spark of divinity, a part of the universe, having a human experience,
Mhm.
it was like my whole soul said, "Yes, you got it." Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you know anything, but you got that,
Yeah.
and it changed everything about the way I show up in the world. Even though I'm human and I still face plant all the time, like
Yeah.
smack right on my face, I screw things up all the time. But but I have an awareness of that, and so for me, that feels kind of like a conquest because up until my early 40s, I didn't have an understanding of that
Mhm.
as an experience. I had some kind of intellectual question about it. And so, and then that continues to be my journey, I guess I
Wow.
could say, to remind myself of that thing that, you know, right now, my experience is even though I'm talking to Maddie, I'm talking to myself. She's another spark of divinity having a human experience, and so this moment is for me all about alignment with that, and so that's for me is a soul's conquest. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. It genuinely makes a lot of sense. So I kind of want to ask you this one question. What was the thing that made you go like, yes, I'm a part of the universe, like I'm a part of that divinity? What was the thing that triggered the entire thought process that led you to that conclusion, if you're comfortable with sharing
Oh yes, I'm really comfortable sharing this. There's darkness to this share.
that? Hmm.
um, about 10 years ago, I went through a very, I think I mentioned earlier in the
Yeah.
podcast, a dark night of the soul, I like to call it, because it sounds dramatic and poetic, and I'm kind of a drama queen, right? So, so I said, I went through this period where I could not discover my purpose in the world. It was, I didn't have an answer for that. And at the time I was drinking heavily
Yeah.
and trying not to feel anything. You know, that thing I was saying
Yeah.
earlier about not feeling pain.
Mhm.
Well, that's what I was doing. I was like, nope, we're not going to feel that. And when I came out of that um, experience, I had a moment of, well, I think it was my first really huge spiritual experience, and I've had multiple since then. They come. I don't think there's ever any one big experience, and then we're like, bam, my light bulb's on.
Yeah.
I keep having them because I stay open to that, and I think I have a meditation practice and a prayer practice that says, let me continue to be downloading your fabulosity because you know this is what I want to be in the world. At least in this physical reality we live in right now.
Yeah.
So that experience came from a dark place where I had no understanding. And now I like to joke and say that I have a limited understanding. But the limited understanding is like turning on one of those giant spotlights, you know, the ones that can shine up into the
Mhm.
sky. You know, it's that bright. It was like that, where I don't know, it was a discovery.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was born, like I said, from a place where I didn't feel any value or worth.
Mhm.
Um, I wanted to be a spiritual person, but I didn't know what that actually meant. I couldn't figure out what that was. And then over the course of doing some getting healthy and then studying myself, I had this light bulb moment, which was a giant one. It was like a 40-story light bulb. The um, Over a course of time, I think it happened, but the light bulb recognition happened on a day. I can remember the day that I went, oh,
Yeah.
my God, literally, I'm thank you. Like I had this moment and then I felt such peace.
Yeah.
And then there it was. And then since then I continue to work towards that. How can I be a bigger conduit? How can I remember my spark of divinity, having the human experience? And then how can I be a contribution while we're living in this funny little world made of stuff, you know, a body and computers and, you know.
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing. And I kind of have two things that I wanted to speak on. And the first one is pretty dark. But I feel like it is in our darkest moments that, we realize the importance of spirituality, and we realize, or we have, like, the darkness is the trigger for us to start the search for, like, it's gonna sound very weird, but start the search for our own self, our soul. Like, hey, where have you been? Like, I know you've always existed with me, but what was your journey? And what am I? Like, people like to call it existential crisis. I like to call it, this is the opportunity for you to actually go deep, like, take a deep dive within yourself and figure out, ask the good questions, and kind of find, like, limited answers, but at least find some answers that will help you kind of push you forward in the journey. Because a lot of people go like, who am I, why am I here on this planet, and this and that, and it's a long list of questions, and a lot of people have faced that. But they face it in a very negative way, as in they look at it from a very negative perspective, that, oh my god, midlife crisis, or oh my god, existential crisis. And I'm like, no, this is your intuition, this is your soul, this is whatever you want to call it, your higher self, your god, universe, whatever it is. This is it telling you that this is the moment for you to ask the questions. And the more you feel that, the more you're like, ask these questions to yourself, find the answers from within, what are you doing? And so it kind of, like I said, keeps screaming until you actually sit down with yourself and go like, who am I?
Yeah.
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 If that makes
Totally.
sense.
I love the way you put that. I don't think that spiritual experiences are exclusive to dark nights,
Yeah.
but I don't know any different way.
Yeah.
My biggest spiritual experience came out of a dark night.
Yeah.
So there it is. That's my understanding, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like, it is, for, it's kind of similar to me as well, because I was a spiritual person, but then there was this wonky place when I was in my teenage years where I was like, yeah, spirituality seems like a hoax. It seems like something too much, and, like, like, oh my god, science can't prove it, this and that, and this and that. And like,
Right.
there was that entire thing of, it being a hoax, and media just kind of like pumping it up, right? Like, spirituality doesn't exist, and this doesn't exist, and that doesn't exist. And
Mm.
then there was a dark moment in my life, and then there were a couple more dark moments in my life, and I was like, I need something right now to kind of make myself, ground myself, if that makes any sense. And that was when spirituality came as an answer for me. So I think for me and for you, like, it came from a dark moment, and it might come from a light moment. And if it does, kind of, please be grateful for that, because you don't want a dark moment to finally be the triggering thing that makes you go like, like, what am I? Like, please, if it comes from a good place, take it like that and be happy and grateful for that. I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think what you said about asking the questions in that moment, now is the moment to ask the questions. That's genius, just the way you put that.
Yeah.
And not solidify anything. Ask the questions.
Yeah.
Who am I? What's happening to me right now? And be open to and curious about what's happening. So I love that. I didn't do that at the end of when that dark night was happening. I had a bit of pushback because it frightened me.
Yeah.
But I think the universe was there for me in some way, nudging me along,
Yeah.
I'm
Ooh.
grateful for that.
Yeah. So I had two things. Now I have three things, one of which we already answered. But would you want to talk a bit about that fear that you experienced, when this sudden change of perspective happened in your life? What did you feel when that happened? Like, obviously, fear is the main element, but could you kind of, if you wanted to, work through the thought process and share it with us?
Yeah, good one. Okay, so and I'm clear about this because it was a very resonant experience and still can be, if I let my mind get away from me. Anxiety in that moment that something was going to happen that was going to be out of my control. Yeah. The anxiousness, of course, there's fear attached there, but it was the idea of control. And what I had tried to do my whole life was control everything.
Yeah.
Oh, Lordy, control everything. And then when I realized that in order for me to have this experience,
Mm-hmm.
I have to relinquish control.
Yeah.
And at the time, a therapist was saying that to me and she was a very spiritual minded therapist, and she was wonderful. And she said, okay, this is the moment. It's like jumping off the cliff without the wingsuit,
Oh, yeah.
right? And I said, what idiot would do that? And she was like, this idiot. And she pointed to me. And and I said, really? And she was like, and she was so encouraging. She said, and I know you can do this, but you have to stop trying to control every fill in the blank thing. She said a naughty word there. um, and I said, okay, I don't know how to do that. And then she said, you will with time. And then with time I did. But it was the anxiety that I felt with having to relinquish control, because my brain would say, if you give in to this big spiritual thing that's like calling you, like, what if it all goes wrong? That's what my brain would do. Like, what if it all goes wrong? That you discover that you're actually not worth anything, that you're
Mm-hmm.
not connected to everyone on the planet, that you're
Yeah.
not a spark of divinity. What if you discover that? That's what my brain wanted to do at the time. It was not a well brain.
Yeah.
And my brain can still do that. It's how human we go into something new and we're like, the brain goes, I don't know if you should do that. Yeah, because it's
Mhm.
trying to keep us safe. The ego is saying, oh, no, 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 that's dangerous territory,
Yeah.
right? Just be good and be a nice boy and do what you're supposed to do,
Yeah.
right? And do the best you can. Well, there it is. So I think that was it. Did that answer your question? It was like
Yeah.
anxiety of the unknown, right? The not knowing what was going to happen and I couldn't control it.
Oh, yeah. I resonated with that so deeply, because for me, I think because of a lot of times I had moments where I wasn't in control and I was afraid of that happening again. So I was
Hmm.
always the kind of person who's like, I need to be as much in control as I can. And then, boom, spirituality hits and you're like, what is happening right now? Like, oh my God, and it has a crazy way of giving you some hard answers.
Right.
It's not something that in a very Hindi term, which is like, it doesn't muscufy you or it doesn't butter you. It's kind of like, it doesn't answer. If you ask a question, if you ask a really good question, there will be times when it won't answer the way you want it to be answered. Like, um, like, okay, so if let's say, like, hey, do you want to take a smoke, like, do you want to smoke a cigarette or something, and you want your soul to be like, yes, smoke a cigarette, and because that kind of kind of um fills you up and like, yeah, my soul is also saying that, but then your soul is like, nope, it's gonna be bad for your health, and you're like, spirituality sucks. That makes sense. And oh my God, yeah. So yeah, and I feel like, with spirituality for me, and this kind of ties up to what I was gonna ask you and speak about next was, for me, spirituality is all about balance. So even
Hmm.
in all of this, right, like, as you said, or for me also as a personal experience, it's like controlling things and kind of letting go. So finding
Hmm.
a balance between that. For
Yeah.
me, spirituality was also, because for me, the biggest spirituality moment was understanding the fact that I was a part of the universe. Like, like it was for you, pretty much the a similar experience, like how you had. So understanding that I'm a part of the universe, but also the fact that I'm living as a human right now here in the now.
Hmm.
So finding a balance between that while I might be a part of this big wonky thing, that constitutes all of us, I might not be that huge a part of it as well. So like the world doesn't revolve around me.
Right.
Yeah, so finding that balance, I think that is spirituality for me, and I think I personally yearn to keep finding that balance everywhere for me, because that's pretty much what spirituality means, and that's super important for me. What does it
Hmm.
mean to you? What does spirituality mean to you?
It is a way, well, I'm going to ping off of what you said.
Mm-hmm.
It is a way to understand my integration into this physical reality.
Ooh.
And for me, it's the bigger picture.
Yeah.
I think I would feel so small without my sense of spiritual fill in the blank,
Yeah.
my spirituality, the way I connect to what I feel like is the whole universe. And when I recognize that I'm part of that and I hold that,
Mm-hmm.
it's a way for me to reconcile
Yeah.
this difficult thing to live in,
Yeah.
because when I'm having what I like to call, and I get this from someone else, but contrasting moments where there's difficulty, whether that be family karma coming up or recently I've been doing this visa process so that I can stay in the UK for good.
Yeah.
And it was very contrasty, to be
Yeah.
nice about it. It was so complicated and difficult, and it was
Yeah.
causing me frustrations. And when I remind myself about the being the spark of divinity, and I initiate practices in order to keep this little physical system,
Yeah.
that my wee little self,
Mhm.
shh, relax, Dan,
Yeah.
right? Dan, who's having this experience on a physical plane, whose name is Dan, right? Just calm, remember who you are really.
Yeah.
It reconciles it for me rather than being hung up in the physicality and the materialism of this world, right? Where I can't get the right job, or, you hear people say, or like, I can't find the right boyfriend or girlfriend, or I don't make enough money, or, and they're all hung up on this thing that we're like in right now. And I'm like, oh my God, there's so much more than this.
Yeah.
This is where we're learning to play with some stuff, energies and understanding. And so for me, that's what it is. It's that integration, and it brings ease to this physical experience somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that was amazing. So last two questions for you. What is the one thing that you know that has happened recently that has created an impact on your life?
Ah, what I was speaking of recently, I have come back to America to do this visa process. And I am being immersed in some family system things that are tricky.
Yeah.
And I say, there's some karmic things coming up. And it's been a moment of contrast where I have been challenged to remember. And right now, talking to you is for me the universe saying, see, being able to speak to Madhurima about this is a reminder of what's really important, to do
Yeah.
the work on the self, to remind yourself that there's something bigger than you, your actual true self,
Yeah.
that can help you hold this experience. And so it's really cool that you asked me that question, because right now in this, what I have been telling my partner is a pressure cooker of experience.
Yeah.
um, I am being called to connect to my higher self more and more. And I'm so grateful for that, even though it's been more difficult. It's really easy to sort of recognize the higher self when we're on a beach and we've just had a good
Yeah.
meal and we're like having a good time, right?
Yeah.
It's very different when we're in the pressure cooker and then having to say, well, be with our higher self. We don't want to do that. We want to fight the pressure cooker
Oh
and try
yeah.
to get out of it. And so that's been my experience most recently that's been most impactful. And I haven't had that in a while. Lockdown has been hard. COVID has been weird and
Yeah.
different. But coming here and over these last 2 weeks has brought all this to the fore. And here I sit with you talking about that.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's
Yeah, it's
that's
very
amazing.
cool.
Yeah. Most definitely. My last thing for you is, what is the one thing that you would like to leave my listeners with?
In direct alignment with what I just said, and we've talked about it a little bit already,
Mm-hmm.
if you can, find a way to be with every experience with equal amount of head and heart. And what I mean is, I've had this contrasty experience recently. My work is to find a way to be with that,
Mm-hmm.
just like I went on a hike the other day up in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful, my favorite place. And over the next couple, 3 weeks that I'm here, I will continue to hike up there. It was very easy for me to be with that experience. I felt the universe flowing through me. I was a little spark of divinity having a luminous, like amazing day, hiking until my feet hurt, right? And it was just beautiful. That was so easy. If we can find a way to be with the difficult experiences by allowing and accepting and being curious about, without trying to fix them or change them or do anything to them, just be with. If I say anything in this podcast, it would be find a way to do that.
Oh,
Have somebody help you find a way to do that, or do that on your own, because it will impact you, I promise you, in a positive way.
yes, that's amazing. I loved that little insight. Thank you so much for being here for sharing your journey, for sharing what you do as coach, and for sharing the dark moments as well as the good moments. I hope you had an amazing time today.
I had an absolutely amazing time. I always love chatting with you. I can't wait to do it again.
Yay! Super excited. Thank you so much for being here. Extremely grateful for this experience.
So am I. Thank you.